Welcome to Headlines. This is David Lichtenstein here in the Yeshiva Shalmaila. This week we have an interesting show continuing our conversation of Sheitlach. We'll be speaking about Tzniyus as well. So we're going to be speaking about the opinions in different parts of the world. We're going to be speaking to Rabbi Yeshua Pfeffer. He's a Dayan, Kollel Mishpat in Yerushalayim. He's a Rav in Yerushalayim. He's the editor of Tzarachian. And he'll be talking about what are the yeshiva standards for Tzniyus, both in wigs and other things. What is a minimum standard for Tzniyus? What is a maximum standard for Tzniyus? If you have a Chumrah, well, does that mean everybody else has to have that Chumrah as well? Can you rely on other shittas in Tzniyus? We will have Rabbi Boruch Oberlander. He's a chassid of Chabad. He's a shliach of Chabad. He's the Av Bezdin of Budapest, the chief rabbi of Budapest. He's a Mechaber Seforim, has printed much. And he'll be speaking about the Chabad shita as far as covering your hair. We will have Rabbi Maryles of the Emes V'Emunah blog. He'll be speaking about the modern Orthodox sheet of Tzniyus. I want to make a point. The last 2 weeks shows our goal was to create conversation, not to paskin. Now there is a Bezdin in Eretz Yisrael that's sending new shluchim to India to do more research. We created more of a conversation. By the way, in the coming weeks, we will have Harav Boaz Bardeya, the Sfardish Shita in hair covering. Will be here in the next few weeks. Some of the topics we're going to be speaking about the next few weeks are Chassidish Shita. What is it? Is it important? Are there really chumras there, or is it just a reason to pay a lot more money? We'll be speaking about LGBT amongst us. Halacha. How do we deal with them from a halacha and hashkafa point of view? The New York Education Bill, is it really good for chinuch? We'll be speaking about alternative medicine in halacha. Is it avodah zara? Are you allowed to use it? Is there any credibility to it? Etc. Our Israeli number is 02, that's for Yerushalayim, 372-0304. And our English number is 33011-702-50. We get a lot of callers from those areas, and I've been asked to announce those numbers again. So here's this week's Halacha Riddle. So we've been speaking a lot about Sfiras Eimer. It's an appropriate time of the year. So here's the Shaila. And last week, by the way, you guys killed it. I asked 2 riddles. And the first one, I thought was an easy one, and a second one, and I got so many amazing answers. So we are going to be sending a gift. At the end of the program, we'll be to play one of the winners, one of the correct answers, and we'll send them a gift. It's 2 of the last 2 headlines that came out. So here's this week's riddle. I have to make it a little bit harder, given how bright this crowd is. Taisus and Menachas Samach Vav Divrei Maschel Zeichel HaMikdash. And the Ran brings it, the last Ran in Psachim says this as well. You want to make a bracha on Sfiras Eimer, Bein Hashmashis, Safik Drabanan Lakula. So if you comes Bein Hashmashis, it's after Shkiya, Taisa says you can make it. Now here's the problem. By Lulav, Mishnah Berurah and Tafresh Dun Beis says that on Bein Hashmashis of Yom Tov Sheni, you pater from Lita Lulav, the Safik Drabanan Lakula. Exact opposite. Since it's Bein Hashmashis, you don't know if it's Yom Tov anymore. You don't take the lulav anymore. Same thing. Shulchan Aruch and Tafresh Pei Zayin of Cotton Hay. By Kriyas HaMegillah, if you didn't hear the whole day Megillah, you could listen Bein Hashmashis. You drank a lot Purim by the party by night. And you didn't hear Megillah, and you wake up, and it's almost ice Purim. It's Bein Hashmashis. What's the halacha? Shulchan Aruch. Listen to the Megillah, but don't make a bracha. Because how could you make a safik? You're going to be nichnas into a safik bracha levatala. You don't. Same thing. L'gabi tkiyah shofar and tafkuf peches of cotton aleph. If you didn't hear the shofar, if you had too much apple and honey, and you drank too much, and you slept all the way through till Bein Hashmashis, or if somebody was a chayla, let's not make what's on this. Somebody was a chayla and he woke up Bein Hashmashis, or somebody didn't have a shofar and they brought him the shofar Bein Hashmashis. You listen, but you don't make a bracha. So why by shofar, by Megillah, and lulav, We say bein hashmashis, you take it without a bracha. By lulav, you don't even take it without a bracha. But by Spheres Aimer, we say just exact opposite. Spheres Aimer, bein hashmashis, hey mamru, make a bracha by Spheres Aimer. Why is Spheres Aimer different than all these other mitzvahs? That is this week's riddle. Before we go to our program, I want to say I got this voicemail, and I got many voicemails. We got probably 100 calls this week on this, probably another 100 emails, 100 calls. So that's a lot of response to one particular program on Sheitlach. And here's one caller.
Hi, I'm calling about the last show about Sheitlach. I'd like to ask, why are you so on the side to permit them? I mean, even say they're not avoiders, but it's not Tzniyus to wear human hair Sheitlach. It defeats the whole purpose of all of the the heter that the Rabbonim who allowed it was the original Sheitlach was made from a horse tail. Not anything compared to today's Sheitlach, and for sure not like a human hair one.
So he has two issues. He says, first of all, the Sheitlach today are different. They used to be made out of horse tails, and I would like to point out that the Darkei Moshe in Ayin Hey in Arachaim, and the Mishnah Berurah brings it as well, says no, human hair Sheitlach were the norm, and additionally, the Mishnah Berurah brings two opinions whether you're even allowed to use human hair Sheitlach that's made out of the same person. In other words, a girl has beautiful hair, she cuts it off, turns it into a wig. Is she allowed to wear the same hair? So human hair Sheitlach have been around for thousands of years. It wasn't horsetails. And part of the reason I would assume is that, well, let's go to the second question. The second question is, why do I say I'm biased? And I admit I am biased. And I'm biased for a number of reasons, okay? And let me tell you, halacha and hashkafa. The biggest paisik we'll ever see in the world until Mashiach comes in the Western Hemisphere, in my humble opinion, is the Baal Igros Moshe, who he said on himself, and he was a very humble man, he said he would be part of the Sanhedrin. And I'll tell you, when I was by his Levaya, Rav Shach, Rav Michal, they both said he would have been a gadol in the time of the Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer died close to 200 years ago. He lived 200 years ago. That's what he would have been a gadol in the time of the Chassam Sofer. And I've said this story before, but I heard it from the Baal HaMaisa, and it's a remarkable story to show how Rav Moshe was like Mishich B'Yolamayla, over all the poskim of his generation. There was a Rosh Yeshiva who I spoke to. His name is Rabbi Portnoy. He was teaching in our Sameach, so he has a Baal Tshuva. And during one of their learning sessions, the Baal Tshuva says to him, my father told me I'm a Kohen. He said, oh, how nice. In another session, he says, and by the way, my wife, who also became a Baal Tshuva through our Sameach, through, when I became from, she joined, or maybe she inspired it, and they have 3 kids together. He says, my wife was actually adopted by her family when she was a child. She was a guy, and they were Megaya her. And so, it's that's why my kids are blonde and blue-eyed. So this report puts 2 and 2 together. He says, wait, your wife is a Baal Tshuva. She grew up, they Megaya her as a child. So she was a guy. Well, a guy is aser, a Giyaris is aser to a Kohen. Alfden Zaina, if she was Megaya after 3. And he says, how old was she? Oh, she was 5 or 6. He says, oh my goodness, you're not allowed to be married to your wife, la halacha. So here we have a guy does tshuva, his wife becomes from, he has 3 kids, they have to get divorced. He goes running to Reb Shlomo Zalman. Shlomo Zalman says, I don't know what to do. So they go to Reb Elyashiv. Reb Elyashiv says, he thinks, I don't know what to do. So this guy in desperation says, is there anybody who I should talk to? So Reb Elyashiv says to him, Gei frag Reb Moshe, go, if you ask Reb Moshe, and Reb Moshe has a heta, we would, of course, we're Saimach, Reb Moshe is the Gadol Hador, the Paisik Hador. So he flew to America, and he comes to Reb Moshe's apartment down on the Lower East Side, and he knocks on the door, and the Gabi says, or Tendler, whoever the Gabi was, says, I'm sorry, the Rosh Yeshiva is not feeling well. So he said, tell the Rosh Yeshiva I'm b'shlichus of Reb Elyashiv and Reb Shlomo Zalman. So he went in. So Reb Moshe said, come in, I'll talk to you for a few minutes. Reb Moshe was lying in bed. He tells Reb Moshe the story, and Reb Moshe says, you said his father's frei? He said, yes. He's not Neman. He's not a Kohen. Then he said, and you said she was adopted by a Freya family and they were Megaya her? The Bezdin was Megaya her? He said, yeah. He said, she's not a Geiris. And I imagine the reason for a Moshe is because Halacha is the reason why you're allowed to be Megaya or Cotton is because it's called a Schus, the Gemara in Ksubas and Daf Yud Aleph, Zachil Adam Shalai B'fan of Ger Cotton Mat Bil Nois Yel Das Bezdin. So what Schus is it to be adopted by a Freya family where you're going to be Mechal Shabbos and eat Nevelos Utrefis? So he said, Zianish King Geiris. So he sent a telegram back to Eretz Yisrael. He said, I came into Rabbi Moshe with a Kohen and a Geiris, and I left with the Yisrael and a Shiksa. So, you see, Rabbi Moshe was not naive at all in Halacha. He saw straight through what other people, Gedolei Olam, couldn't see. He saw in one, he said he paskined it in 2 minutes. And then he walked, they took him out of the room. Rabbi Moshe was our Godlad, our Paisik. So not only was he just the greatest Paisik we'll ever hear, but additionally, he lived here. And there's two important things in that. One is, the famous Gemara, and the Rashba brings it, says, Halacha, we paskin that way in Rashba in Chelik Aleph Reish and Gimel. The Gemara says, B'mkaimei shel Rebbe Lezer, they used to cut wood on Shabbos to make an Izmol for Milah. And the Gemara in Kalabasar, I don't remember what daf it is, the Gemara in Kalabasar says that the Asrei Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, they would eat chicken and milk because he didn't hold. He says, and a chicken, any oif doesn't give milk. He says there's no isser of basar oif, and they paskin that way in his Asrei. So this is Asrei de Rabbi Moshe. But additionally, and this is an important point, and we've quoted it before. The Gemara says Yiftach b'derek yishmol b'derek, and Rabbeinu Menoach says that not only does it go on who the Gadol is, but it depends everybody in their location. You have to go after the Gadol of that location. He knows that location. He knows the peculiarities of that. And the Mishnah Berurah brings in Hilchos Yom Kippur, when you choose a doctor to tell Chayla whether to eat, he says the doctor of your city, he brings this Rabbeinu Menoach, is the Gadol of that city. Don't go to a doctor. He knows the peculiarities, the type of virus that's going around the neighborhood now, the type of whooping cough, whatever it is, he's in touch. So Rabbi Moshe lived here and he knew it, the halachas of here. And Rabbi Moshe has a fascinating tshuva in Even Ezer. He was asked by a person whose wife used to be megaleach reisha. She shaved her head, kiminig, like many, the Chassidim, the holy Hungarian Chassidim. The Netziv brings it as well. It's actually a takanas arba rasas, which is a Polish minhag. So Rabbi Moshe in Even Ezer in Aleph and Tes was asked. He says, I married a woman whose minhag is to shave her head, and I don't have that minhag, and I find it very upsetting. And she says, look, this is my minhag. What do I do? So Rabbi Moshe says he has a right to be makbid and to tell her to shave her head. And he says, shaving the head, the Torah calls, is an act of nibul. It says by an eishes yefas toyer. He says v'golcha es reisha. And Ramban says, because it's an evil gadol, it's an act of, the women cry when they cut their hair, right? It's something, it's a halo of beauty, a woman's hair. He says, avada the baal could be makbid. And here's the exact lashon of Rabbi Moshe. He says, ein lahachshiv es habal la'adam kal. The husband who does not want his wife to shave her head should not be seen as an adam kal, that he doesn't want gedorim v'siyagim, because he says we see Chazal were makbid on this. And he brings a raya. He says, the Gemara says, by Abba Chilkiah, he says, Chasidei Olam, the holiest people in the Gemara, like Abba Chilkiah, the Barbrei of Chayni HaMa'agel, Chayni, who, when he davened, he was able to bring rain, Parnasset, to feed the world when everybody was starving, and he was the only one who could do it. So the Gemara in Tainus says, on Daf Chav Gimel, he was makbid that his wife should dress beautifully and look beautifully. Why? Rabbi Moshe says, Shelo yiten einav b'isha acheres. He says he shouldn't be nice and einav b'isha acheres. He says a husband has a right to be makbid. So why do I say this? I say we live in America today, and marriage is hard. And there's a lot of divorce. And we have to be cognizant of it. And Rabbi Moshe knew what the streets of America are like. And I don't know if he knew what the internet would bring, but I guess he knew the callous of America, the lack of Yerushalayim in America. He knew the fire that was the street. Remember, even though Ramosha was nifta, there was no internet, but there was a hippie generation. The way people would walk on the streets was the same then that it is now. Clothing is optional, right? And Ramosha understood that shelo yiten einav beisha acheres by chayni amagel is certainly in America, in New York, and its surrounding cities, in circa, when Ramosha lived, 1990, 1980, 1970. I don't remember the exact date of this tshuva. So why do I say that marriage is hard? So when people come and they say, we have new chumras, and Ramosha paskin on Indian hair sheitlach, that it's mutter. So when people come and they say, there are banim in Yerushalayim and Bnei Brak, and I say, you know what? In Bnei Brak, if you feel that the streets and this, and you don't have to worry about shalayitin einav ba'acher, or there's a concept in the Gemara, maybe 20 times, all different halacha, l'chavav al baila, anidas asa kol zayin l'chav al baila. You're allowed to be mistakel b'pnei kala kol zayin l'chav al baila. Shaloi leganois, a woman shouldn't, shaloi leganois, a woman shouldn't look unattractive, shaloi tizgana love. There's maybe tilei tilim, 20 different halachas in the Gemara, shaloi tizgana love. Kalas, Toich Shiva is allowed to wash her face, Shaloi Tizgana, Aninas isn't Toicha, isn't Noig, Shiva, etc. All Shaloi Tizgana love. Reb Moshe lived here. He knew marriage was difficult here. He knew that the streets are on fire. He didn't want husbands who work wherever they work, or they see internet, and or they're exposed to media, to come home and the wife is wearing a piece of plastic on her head or shaving her head. So I say that if the women who are noig that way, they shaved it or they have these chumras and they're happy with it and their husbands are happy with it, Tavi Olam Bracha. It's definitely, any chumra in halachas is avisha b'kedusha. But if it causes shalei tiskane, shalei lechavav baila, we have the psak of the Gadol Hadoyer, and he says no. And if you're coming to be machmir, you're coming to be machmir. You're not coming to be macher. You're coming to be mekel in shalom bayis. You're coming to be mekel in zerel of atola. You could be coming to be mekel in znus, or who knows what marriage dysfunctionality could cause. So yes, I am partial, and I say that when you paskin something, you have to paskin looking at the entire picture, and especially when we have the Moreh, the Asra of America, Mokum, Oberlander, there were Kairos, the Mokum of Rabbi Moshe, and he said over here, no, what our main thing that we have to worry about is Shaloi L'chavav al Baila, Shaloi Tiskana love, and that's why I had this sort of a biased opinion. My apologies if you don't agree. My intent here is to create conversation, Divrei Torah, to show you all the different opinions. I apologize for any time that I offend somebody. It is not my intent. But when every time we speak about dvarim that have to do with halacha, that there are a number of opinions, well, 50% aren't going to agree. I recognize that. So I love you all, and I respect no matter what you do. I'm just pointing out my bias in this matter. Before we go to our wonderful guest, I'd like to say a short word on the Parsha. And this Parsha, it's like it goes against everything that we speak about here in the program. It's, today, what's popular? What's popular is understanding the Rebbe who puts his arm on and supports the bacher, the teacher who says, I'm going to understand the girl who comes from this type of a house. We're moving towards enlightenment and compassion. And then you look at this week's Parsha and you say, what's going on over here? The story of the Kollel. And we've all had this story in our lives, or we've seen it in Yeshiva or Beis Yaakov. You have a boy. His father was killed by a Mitzri, who then rapes his mother. She was beautiful, Shleimus Bas Divrei. The Gemara says, and the Yonasan ben Azil says it, that this Mitzri had 120 Jewish slaves who worked for him, and one of them had a beautiful wife. So he went in and he raped the wife and he killed the husband. And this little boy, he was fighting. Right? What does that mean? It says, Vayinatzu b'machnes, and the Mefarshim say, what were they calling him? They were calling you a little Egyptian, mamza. That's what they were telling him. Imagine what life was for this kid. In the machne of Klal Yisrael, the Degalim. So it says he picked up his thing. He was looking for some place to go. So he camped himself in Machne Dan, which is where his mother came from. Right? And what did they say? Tameh, Arais. He said, what did I do? My father was killed. My mother was raped. Arais, kadayim. And what did he do? He was Makallel b'Shem. And what did they do? And they didn't know what to do. He said, Haitziyuva. So we say, what did this kid do wrong? You know, the kid in yeshiva, he goes to yeshiva, and he's not smart, or he comes from a not good family, or the girl her looks aren't what other people expect of her, or the boy or the girl who have a weight issue. So many issues, and the kids in the class make fun, and they go to the principal and they says, they made fun? Well, guess what? I even have a better joke. And the kid turns around and he makes an obscene gesture to the principal. What do? They throw the kid out of school. We've seen this. And you say, how could this be? So I want to, and I'm not sure I'm right, I want to suggest an answer. There were two people, I want to juxtapose two people in the Torah. You have the B'nai Tzlafcha, they were orphans. And they said, they had no nachla. And what did they do? They went to Moshe Rabbeinu, and they figured it out. And then you have the Makallel. And you know, the Makallel really had a very adverse set of circumstances. He was the kid in the class who had terrible acne, the skin who never went away, whose parents didn't have parnasa, who didn't have shalom bayis, who had addiction issues, who had food, diet issues, anorexia, bulimia. They had somebody in the family who was sick, who sucked all the attention out of the family. There's so much tzaras in Klal Yisrael. People, humanity, we have so much tzaras. Most of it we didn't ask for. And there's two attitudes. We could do what a very great Jew, my hero, you know who my hero is? Rabbi Eckstein from Dur Yesharim had 4 children, Rahman al-Islam, who died of Tay-Sex. And he said, 4 children died of Tay-Sex. I could cry, I could jump off a bridge, I could shoot myself, or I could eradicate Tay-Sex from Klal Yisrael. And that's what he did. He was here in our program. He said he was there when the only hospital for Tay-Sex in New York City, the ward, they put a chain lock on it. He eradicated Tay-Sex, and he's working on eradicating. He could have been Makallel. He wasn't Makallel. He went ahead and he used that energy to do something superhuman. We've all heard the story of, father sees a child, the Jeep turns over, and the father, a skinny guy, 120 pounds, with superhuman strength, picks up the Jeep and turns it over so his kid could get out. That's Rabbi Eckstein, 4 children. And he saved 40,000 children, maybe 400,000 diseases. Or he could have been a Makallel. So the Torah says something very powerful here. Do you know the Netziv was a brilliant kid? He played all day. He was not interested in learning. And famously, his parents said, you know what, you're not interested in learning? His father was fine. He said, good, you're coming to the shoemaker to become an apprentice. Because here in the Litta, people were very poor. At your bar mitzvah, you went, or 12, you went one of 2 ways. You were one of the few who could sit and learn forever, but the rest of them had to eat. They had needed apprenticeships. They got jobs when they were 11. They went into an apprenticeship. His father took him to the shoemaker. Here, start working on the shoes. So he said, a shiver ran through my whole body. And he was never mavatal another moment after that. You could be Makallel, or you could change the world. In my life, I've seen this many times. Think of it. The worst insult you had, the worst time somebody hurt you, did it inspire you to say, I'm going to try harder because I'm not going to let that blankety blank blank be right? So we could be Makallel and Yinatsu and start fighting with that other guy, or we could use it as nuclear fuel to change, to inspire ourselves. I heard from a Chavrusa going to be like Feldheim. He typed beautifully. He said the pasuk, Even moasu haboinim haisal l'reish pina. The stone that was despised, the unfit stone, one oddly shaped stone, when they came to build the Beis HaMikdash, it didn't fit in anywhere. The Shamir shaped it in some bizarre fashion. And then when they came to the top of the Beis HaMikdash, there was one stone, the capstone, nothing would fit. And one of the builders remembered the castaway stone. This oddly shaped stone became l'reish pina. So he said, many people understand it. They say, Somebody gets beaten up, you say to him, you know what? When you grow up, you'll be 6'2", and you'll beat the other kid up. The teacher, one day that teacher who embarrassed you will be ashamed. That's one way to look at it. It's a superficial way. Maybe you'll be able to beat the person who embarrassed you. But he said a deeper way to understand it is like this. He says, Even Masu Habaynim, the thing that most hurt you in your life, Haisel Pina, can be the reason for your greatest success in life. The thing your biggest hurt, I'm going to let that thing beat me. I'm going to let that blankety blank guy be right and me be wrong and fail. I'll show him. Life gives us things. We could be Kollel, or like Rabbi Reuven writes in Shari Tshuva Kina Falti Kamti, he said the nefila is a reason for your success. So what do? Haitzius ha-Kollel menamachne. Kollel is not the way of the Jewish people. We don't curse the darkness. We light a candle. And I'll tell you, in my life, I've seen this many times. I remember years ago when I lived in Lakewood, there were so many, get all the time knocks on the door, people crying. They can't afford a bris. They can't afford a bar mitzvah. They can't. And then you get approached a lot of times. And it used to drive me crazy. I said, the holy and Galite, they're serving the greatest cause, Torah. And then when they come out, they don't have parnasa. And then I was approached by a young man, Reb Daniel Soloff, and he said they're starting an organization there called PCS, which trains the Galite, and it's, 15 years later, and 5,000 guys graduated later. Because my wife looked at me, she said, the Jews don't curse the darkness. We turn on a light. And that's the message of the Makal. Take the biggest grief, your biggest aggravation, your biggest embarrassment, and use it as a fuel to create something, to create yourself. Even Masu Habaynim, the thing that embarrassed you the most, Haisel Pina, make it turn you into the best you can be. Let's go to our guests. We have on the phone with us from Yerushalayim, Rabbi Yehoshua Pfeffer, who is a Rav in Ramot. He's a former Dayan and Rabbi Weiss's Bezdin. He's the chief halachic writer for Rabbi Fleischman's yeshiva, which is the number one. I think they train more Dayanim than anybody in Eretz Yisrael. And he's the chief halachic writer for Din. It's an honor to have you with us, Rabbi Pfeffer.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here again. Thank you.
So, Rabbi Pfeffer, we had on a Lubavitcher Rav from Budapest, a big Talmud Chacham, who spoke about Lubavitcher Shita in Sheitlach, a little bit in Tzniyus. And then we had on somebody from the Sephardi community. So we wanted somebody from the yeshiva community, and I know you're Dayanis in the yeshiva community. You're very respected in Eretz Yisrael. So tell me a little bit about what is the yeshiva world's opinion about Sheitlach, about human hair Sheitlach, about Tefach Bisha Erva by Sar, about wearing a Sheitel at home. Give us a little bit of I know you've written about this. Give us a little bit of your Chavaz Das.
Okay, I'm happy to speak about the topic. I have to say that within the yeshiva world, or the yeshiva community, or the Haredi community, broadly speaking, I don't think it's not a uniform community. It's not homogeneous. There are, a variety of opinions, and these can be seen very easily. Anyone coming to Yerushalayim just looks at the kind of leaflets and broadsides that you see for and against Sheitlach and human hair and Tzniyus issues in general, which clearly are a very important part of our Yiddishkeit, both because of their inherent importance and also because they define what the public domain looks like. Because it is such a public issue and such a defining issue, then people really care very much about it. And this is always there's a certain tension here because, of course, the halacha wants to express the value of Tzniyus, but on the other hand, if you get too caught up in all of the, nitty-gritty and the fine lines, and then you can sometimes lose track of 1 second. There's actually a value here. There's actually a something about privacy and something about dignity and refraining from externalization. And sometimes the whole debate that goes on is so externalized, it's not such a perhaps chanua way to have the debate about Tzniyus. So that's really an introduction to the topic. We want to realize the value of Tzniyus, but we also need to understand that it's not just about the halachic, centimeters. It's about the value and education for Tzniyus goes beyond halacha. So,
Rabbi Pfeffer, let me interrupt and share with you something. In the last few months, there was a school where one of the students sent a video where they lined up all the girls, and I think these were, if I remember, 9-year-old girls, and they were measuring with a ruler their hair, exactly how long their hair was. And it reminded me of the Mishnah that talks about how you weigh a behemoth for Erechin. Now, if Tzniyus means, a certain being like a ben melech for a boy and a bas melech for a girl, which talks about dignity, how would they act in Buckingham Palace? If you look at the Queen, she doesn't run around in trousers, nor does she wear, provocative outfits. So the halachas of Tzniyus and Chazal Keveya could have been written in bucket. It's exactly how a ben melech and a bas melech. And I'm looking, they're measuring the girl's hair like behemoths, and I'm thinking, this is a person who may think they're doing the halacha, and they're violating the exact spirit of it's the total violation of the bas melech, treating them like animals. So it's a case where, dignity, personal privacy, respect for other were totally violated by somebody's mishigas. And so I'm just seconding the motion that there's a tension between what is halachically correct and what is dignity and privacy, etc.
Yeah, I can readily agree with you, and I would say that it is a great shame that many of our girls find it very hard to speak about Tzniyus as a value without automatically thinking about centimeters and denier, thickness of socks and length of hair. And I'm not saying that these details are not important. They have their place. But when they get in the way, when they cloud your vision of what Tzniyus really is, then of course we're not doing something right. And the other point that you mentioned in passing, but it's another important point, is that it's very easy to be stringent and then to place your stringencies, which some of them are really meshugasim, but to place the burden of those stringencies on the girls. I saw recently a notice at a local shul that said, we've had some very upsetting and inconvenient incidents because of girls wearing socks that were like flesh-colored socks. So please warn, mothers and daughters to refrain from these. It's a real discomfort. And again, halachically everything's great. There's no halachic taina here, but because there's some badly educated men who behave, I guess, like behemoths and tell off girls who are dressed absolutely fine, but not to their taste. So we're going to make the girls take on some new Chumrah, and these Chumras, of course, it's all against the whole spirit, the whole idea of halacha. Halacha gives you the range. It gives you a certain fence that you're not afraid of falling off the end of the roof. But once you have that fence, then it's a fence to live in. It's a fence in which you should be able to really live those values, to realize what it means to be a Jewish person with those values. And once you make a fence within a fence and you narrow your scope to a very narrow kind of area, field in which you can live, then of course you basically stifle the person's ability to express and to articulate and to live those values. So I identify with that opening point. But to get back to
one more question, Rabbi Pfeffer. To further prove the point that Tzniyus is greater than way it's understood in the street by the hoi polloi, that it's about trying to restrict a woman's movements, right, or provocativeness, etc., most of the Gemaras that talk about Tzniyus talk about men. And most of the Halacha that's quoted about Tzniyus is speaking about men. It says, Tsanua bebeis hakisei. Rav Huna was, what does that mean, Tsanua bebeis hakisei? It's talking about men. It's talking about, in other words, it's talking about the crass humor, sounds, appearances that are inappropriate. So it's not just talking about provocativeness. It's talking about class, the opposite of vulgarity, the opposite of, not fineness, coarseness. And again, halachically, tell me if I'm wrong, most of the Gemara that Tzniyus talk about men, not women.
Well, I would say yes, and I would say even further than that. I mean, of course, you have Gemara such as a person shouldn't walk behind a woman, and that's an instruction to men to be careful of where they walk, right? The Radvat says that that's because of Hihurim, that a person shouldn't come to improper thoughts, and therefore he should be careful not to observe the motions too much. But we're not telling women to stay off the street. We're telling men to watch out for their own benefit and for the dignity and the cleanliness of their own thoughts. And the same is true for the sugya in brachos that speaks about kriyashma. That's not a sugya that really tells women how to dress. We can perhaps extrapolate from there, but the sugya itself is speaking about in which circumstances should you or shouldn't you be saying kriyashma, and about how your thoughts have to be proper and clean and appropriate for the time of davening and for saying brachos. So even the real Tzniyus related sugyas are also addressed primarily at men. I mean, again, the pasuk tells us what does the Kadosh Baruch Hu want from us? Mishpat b'avas chesed, right? To be a modest person, to be somebody who is the opposite of, as you said, of vulgarity and coarseness and of course arrogance. You meet people who are perhaps halachic, men or women, but their arrogance and their externalization and their shallowness is everything but Tzniyus. So absolutely.
Okay, so I'm sorry I interrupted you twice. I often get criticized for this, but continue what you were telling us about.
Right. So in terms of the yeshiva world, again, it's a diverse place. But I would say that probably the starting point for this is Rav Moshe. When it's famous, a number of famous tshuvas of Rav Moshe Feinstein, where he speaks about the question of covering hair. This is a delicate question because we have the Ramah in Siman Ein Hey that speaks about, he brings an opinion of Rishonim that even less than a tefach of a covered part of a woman's body is considered to be an erva. Of course, the discussion there is for purposes of Kriya Shema, but still it's extrapolated on how the appearance or the public appearance of a woman should be. And then the question is whether that's extended to hair covering also. And Rav Moshe, in a couple of, I think, well-known shuvas, he says that we don't extend it to the question of hair covering. And he says that when it comes to hair covering, we can be mekel up to a tefach. He does say that it's worthy of covering hair completely, and he's very happy that hair should be covered with a sheitel. He has shuvas about sheitluch also, and he doesn't have a problem with that. But he does say that he's speaking to a Talmid Chacham, I think, and he says even for a Talmid Chacham, there's no problem for a shidduch or for getting married with a woman who will be uncovering up to a tefach. He speaks about a tefach at the surface area, and that's also a machlokes, but he says up to a tefach of hair being uncovered is okay. So, I think many people go with that kind of direction. People don't necessarily think of tefachim, and they don't have to, but it means that you cover your hair, broadly speaking. Broadly speaking, it's a complete hair covering. We don't go with, rubai kekule and outlandish ideas which haven't been accepted in halacha. But we have a complete hair covering, and we're not worried if some parts of the hair are showing on the sides, on the front, on the back, coming out, the seah hayotis mina mitzamasa, something that the Rishonim speak about. So we're less worried if some elements of hair come out. We're aware that there's a zoya. We're aware that there's other, chumras that one can take on if one wishes. But in terms of public morality and public halacha, I would say that's the base. That's the basic. That's where we start from.
So let me ask you something, Rabbi. As a yeshiva Dayan, if you would see one of your talmidim, that's why his wife uncovered her hair at tefach, would you say anything? Would you say he's doing like the Shulchan Aruch?
If he up to a tefach or more than a tefach?
No, up to a tefach.
Up to a tefach, I wouldn't say anything. I would make a bracha. I'd probably make a bracha even if it's more than a tefach, based on the Aruch HaShulchan. Right. But again, if a person is keeping to halacha, the fact that other poskim want to be more machmir and so on is not a reason for us to go telling people off. That's not to say that each community doesn't have a right to legislate or to discern, to define the parameters of its own Tzniyus values. That's a question of whether you have to wear socks or you don't have to wear socks, the length of skirts or the length of sleeves, and all of these different kind of elements are a question mainly of community values, of community, public morality and public keeping of halacha. And like I said at the beginning, Tzniyus is very much a public face. That's why it has such this importance. And each community has the right to define for itself. But in this issue, the less than a tefach and a bit more hair and a bit less hair, this is really, fine tuning. I would definitely not say anything about this.
So Rabbi Pfeffer, could you tell us, like, what are the halachic guidelines and where is it minhag and chumrah? Like 4 inches below the knee, sleeves down to the wrist, stockings, a leg can never be uncovered. Which of these are halacha, which are communal, which are minhag? Give us some guidelines.
Okay. It's a tricky question because you have many different shittos among the poskim, and there's going to have to be some picking and choosing here between the different poskim. As norms change, of course, again, just to take as an example, before I directly answer your question, to take as an example the question of whether basulos, whether maidens, unmarried women, need to cover their hair or not. This is, it's a huge question. It makes a huge difference to the way the public domain looks and the way we bring up kids. And this is, of course, a tremendous machlokes. And the Shulchan Aruch paskins that unmarried women need to cover their hair in Even HaEzer, even though the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim mentions that you can make brachos in front of women whose custom is not to, where the custom is for unmarried girls not to cover their hair, then you can make a bracha in front of the unmarried girl who's not covering the hair. So, this is a huge question, of course, and it developed based, of course, on custom. In Arab countries, the custom is for girls to cover their hair, and whether married or unmarried, and of course that's the Tzniyus norm, and because it's a Tzniyus norm, so that becomes the obligatory norm. It's the norm that we have to keep to. And Rav Moshe mentioned this. Rav Moshe himself brings a raya, he brings a proof from the case of unmarried women that the question of hair covering depends on the norm. He actually brings a raya to the Aruch HaShulchan also, that in places where it's the norm for unmarried women to go with uncovered hair, which of course he says it's wrong. It's the Gemara says it's a din Torah in Ksubas. But he does say that this is a proof for the Aruch HaShulchan that these things depend on custom, and that itself, the fact that there's such a tremendous distinction between one community and the other concerning whether the obligation to cover hair applies even to unmarried girls, that demonstrates the force of custom and how things are able to change. But to get to the question. Yeah.
Well, Rabbi Pfeffer, I was in Eretz Yisrael 2 weeks ago, and I saw a number of young Jewish girls. I think they were 7 or 8 years old, totally covered from head to toe. Like it wasn't a burqa.
The shawl. This is the shawl.
Yeah.
Yeah, the shawl cult.
Yeah, and this is not unlike the Rambam. It's in Hilchos. I don't remember if it's either Perek Tesvav or Chav Beis, where he says the derech of an isha is to go with a redid, which means a full body covering from head to toe. Yeah. And clearly halachically today we don't that was in Arabic countries, and that would have been obligatory, I imagine, if you lived in that country. The Rambam paskins it as obligatory.
Absolutely, the Rambam paskins the redid, and the redid, of course, the source of that is in the Gemara in Ksubas for the Das Moshe, that the kalasa is not sufficient, and you need
Gemara and Dayan days.
Exactly, and of course nobody does that today. Certainly not in Western countries. So
give us, Rabbi, tell us what is the halachic minimum, and then what was added on by customs in different countries.
Well, the halachic minimum again. The Gemara mentions one specific instance of sheik be'isha erva. And on sheik be'isha erva, I think it's the Eshkoel, and perhaps some of the other Rishonim say that the reason why the Gemara singles out sheik be'isha erva is actually to make this point, that this is something that doesn't change. Sheik, of course, I'm referring to sheik as meaning the thigh, which also emerges from the Parsha.
Which the Chazon Ish disagrees with, but let's continue. Yeah, I'm sorry.
The Chazon Ish, well, he finishes off as a kind of a suffix, the Chazon Ish, because he doesn't want to dispute the Mishnah Berurah. But the pasuk says Gali Sheik Avri Naharot, and then Tagel Ervascha, meaning that there's a connection between the erva and the sheik. They seem to be close to one another. But again, assuming that the sheik is the upper part of the leg above the knee, so there are Rishonim that make the point and say that is something which is unchanging, even in a society in which the custom, let's say, or the norm would be to wear very short skirts. Then that would still be forbidden al pi halacha. I can't say this without mentioning Rabbi Reuven Yosef, who writes in a famous tshuva that if there's a choice between wearing trousers, wearing pants, and between wearing short skirts, he says, well, of course you should wear pants, because the short skirt is a real issue of causing erotic and improper thoughts. And whereas, we have other issues with pants that we consider them to be immodest, but it doesn't reach the level of sheik be'isha erva, which Chazal say. So that's one, for example, halacha that would be unchanging, and because it's something which is a part of human nature, that when you get close to the erva and where you have areas of the female body that cause these kind of thoughts or improper thoughts, then that wouldn't change based on society. And now, then the question is,
Rabbi Pfeffer, let me comment. The halacha of sheik be'isha erva, would there be a heter of tefach be'isha erva by sheik? I believe it's about.
You mean less than a tefach?
Less than a tefach. So let's say somebody had a skirt that revealed a piece of the thigh that was less than a tefach. I apologize, I did not prepare adequately for this, but I believe it's 2 days. The Taz is machmir and other paiskim are machmir.
The Taz, yes. You're absolutely right. The question again is back to the Gemara in Brachos of why does the Gemara single out the sheik? And the Bach and perhaps it's the Taz also make the point that for this specific part of the body which is especially potent in causing improper thoughts, then even less than a tefach. It's I think the Prima Godim also, the Bach and the Prima Godim. Each one has his own slight variant on it, depending on whether it's your wife or it's another woman. But we don't need to get into that. But it is the Bach and the Prima Godim. However, if you don't count the Bach and the Prima Godim, other poskim don't say this, and for them this would be contingent on the machlokes between the Shulchan Aruch and the Yesh Omen brought in the Ramah about whether less than a tefach of a generally covered part of the body is considered an erva. And the great majority the majority of placements for sure side with the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch and say that it wouldn't be considered an erva. The Chayei Adam, if I remember correctly, says that all poskim agree on this, and certainly many Rishonim agree on this. And based on this, then the idea of less than a tefach would apply even to the shoik. Of course, I would like to just emphasize. I think it's very good that in frum society and certainly in yeshiva society we're very careful to have skirts that are long enough that the sheikh wouldn't be revealed in any circumstances. But if you're asking me, like you said at the beginning, what's the community norm and what's the, if somebody, if a secular girl comes over to me and asks me, how do I need to dress al pi halacha, I wouldn't say you need 10 centimeters below the knee. I would tell her the basic halacha, which is what we're speaking about now.
Also, or if you don't hold like the heter of Darcha Shulchan would be shayla gabe kiddush. Could you make kiddush when a girl is wearing a short skirt and it's shaykh bi she'erva would be a
right.
That would be an afkimi halacha too.
Absolutely. So
what about Rabbi Pfeffer? It's not discussed much in the Shulchan Aruch, and I apologize. I took out a Shulchan Aruch. Yes, it's the Pri Megadim on the Taz. That's what I thought.
Right, Pri Megadim, yes.
On the Taz, and the Mishpat says of. So my question is, what about the knee itself? Like if the Shulchan Aruch says that shaykh be'isha is erva, but you go, let's say, those who don't hold like the Pri Megadim, that pachas mi tefach is not an erva. Is the knee considered part of the shaykh? Is the knee not part of the shaykh? What's your understanding?
Well, the Mechaber says ad
ha-birkayim.
Right.
It's not clear as ad bichlal or not ad bichlal.
Right. He doesn't tell us about whether it's ad bichlal or not. I remember
the Pri Megadim though is which he's quoting seems to say past the knee. That's what I learned this in a while, but that's what I remember the Pri Megadim saying.
Right.
Okay, but what is the knee? Is the knee part of the shaykh or is the knee part of the next part of the leg? And it would seem to me that if you would look at the physiology of the knee, it's two joints that come together. So I guess till the middle of the knee is part of the shaykh,
right,
and the middle of the knee now is
the knee is the cutoff point. I remember seeing a shiva once in it must have been in Pnei Banim, who discusses this, and he mentions that this is he puts this into a suffix. He says, he doesn't like people who are overly machmir, as we know, and he says, come on, the knee itself is a suffix, and there's also secrets about, who says it's going to cause somebody improper thoughts, and who says it's going to become uncovered, and he mentions a whole list of secrets. One of them was that whether the knee is considered a shaykh or not. I didn't research this, so it's something which I'd be happy to research, but it's a good point, meaning, we're careful to, in our communities, of course, we're careful to make sure that the knee is covered, perhaps because we're concerned that is considered part of the shaykh, or at least it's the beginning of the shaykh, like you said. But again, one shouldn't lose the Tzniyus value by getting lost in questions. You can discuss for days and nights whether the knee is part of the shaykh or not.
I have the Pri Megadim open in front of me, and I quoted wrong. This is his lashon. Nimtza kol ha-regel ad arkuva shekayrin kni, until the knee, makom shalom yach umagula efsher ein chashash. No, so he's going from the bottom. He's saying from the bottom, kol ha-regel ad arkuva. He's saying, so I was right. I was right. He's saying till the knee would be permitted, right? Ume'arkuva l'mayla pachas bitefach nami. So even though the Mishnah Berurah's language is mashma the opposite, the Pri Megadim is more machma than the Mishnah Berurah. Yeah. So continue. But here's what's interesting. So from the knee on, let's say you're saying the knee, our minhag is to cover. What about from the knee on? Well, what's the halacha?
From the knee down?
Yes.
From the knee down.
I know many seminaries are makbid, many girls, that has to be 4 inches below the knee.
Well, again, from the knee below, the reason why people are generally makbid on longer skirts is because to ensure that no area should be uncovered when a girl or a lady would sit down. But in principle, beneath the knee, that's called a makam. It's not called a sheik, and therefore it would depend on the custom.
Except for the chazanish. Except for the chazanish, right?
That's correct. Again, if you say that this is considered a sheik, then of course you would need to cover it based on the principle that sheik b'isha ever. But even the chazanish is reluctant to make a firm decision on this because the Mishabura is so clear. And again, Zilbasar Tama for one, there's a certain Zilbasar Tama here. What's the problem? The problem is that it's going to cause Hihurim. We know more or less, we have a certain intuition about things that cause Hihurim. And again, I'm not denying that this is community-based and things change based on different societies, but certainly one can understand intuitively that above the knee is an area that ought to be covered based on Tzniyus values. And like I said before, the pasuk itself implies that it's the area above the knee. Beneath the knee will depend on custom, and therefore there's no strict halacha. In places where the custom is not to cover, then you don't have to cover. Now, it's true that
Rabbi Pfeffer, would it be true to say, would you agree with this statement, that in Bnei Brak certainly, the Chazanish believe that the thigh, the shaykh goes till the ankle. Shouldn't say the thigh. The shaykh continues, which is why in Bnei Brak they'll wear skirts or stockings that are not visible through all the way through the ankle. So we have on one end we have the Chazanish, which is the most Chumrah de Kashita in this, the most, it's all the way to the ankle. And the other side, you have the simple reading of the Mishnah Berurah, which is it's till the knee, which would mean till the knee is the top of the knee. And if tefach b'isha have is less than a tefach, it's not an erva, according to the Shitas that argue on the Pri Megadim, up to 3 inches above the knee would also be mutter. So we have from 3 inches above the knee as one shita, all the way to the ankle as the chumrah. Would that span it? Is that a proper statement or not?
Well, I mean, the part about the Mishnah Berurah is not so simple, because the Mishnah Berurah himself is actually fairly makpid on the second shita. You would have to make a kind of amalgam, a kind of mix of the shitas, because the Mishnah Berurah himself, when he speaks about the two opinions mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch, one of the Shulchan Aruch and the other the Ramah, the Shulchan Aruch is mekel up to a tefach, while the Ramah is not mekel up to a tefach. Then the Mishnah Berurah leans towards and cites the stringency of the Ramah. Other person, of course, don't necessarily, but he does. So the Mishnah Berurah himself, who gives you the color of going up to the knee, would probably say you have to cover up to the knee and not to leave less than a tefach, certainly for Kriya Shema purposes at the very least. So I wouldn't go all the way with your color of being above the knee, but again, this is of course a very, very significant machlokes, and at the same time, it's a little bit. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. What I'm thinking is that we live in a world, we live in a modern age where the road, the street, the public domain, the farhesia, is so not tzniustic. It's so, immodest, even promiscuous on some levels. And, we can pride ourselves so much on having the values of tznius being expressed and having our men and our women care about not externalizing themselves, not demonstrating themselves, not showing themselves off. It's such a virtue. It's such a it's a joy to be able to live in such societies. When you think about that, then these differences become, come on, okay, these centimeters and these centimeters. It makes you think about, that it's missing the point. The point is that we care about keeping the private things private, about and And of course, again, I'm the last to be chas v'shalom mezazel in the fine details. They're important, but it's also important to put it in perspective, to put it in context. And the context is that we're able to maintain a Tzniyus society. And whether you're in Bnei Brak or in Yerushalayim, and whether you wear these colored socks or these colored socks, I'm not the person to make too big a deal of these signs. I know that some people do, and some people think it's worthwhile printing broadsides in very bold letters and telling us that all the terrible things in Klal Yisrael happen because we're wearing the wrong color socks. I didn't buy that.
Well, let me go back to some of the points you mentioned. I think in Afkamina, whether let's say you go like the Mishnah Berurah who says it's at the knee or the Chazon Ish would be at the ankle, is if a girl is not wearing socks or wearing short socks.
Sure.
So according to the Chazon Ish, it's the equivalent of wearing short sleeves, or it's the equivalent of a low-cut blouse. And according to the Mishnah Berurah, it would be perfectly permissible, which is what Rabbi Moshe writes in the Tshuva. So I think that machlokes is very relevant, and because let's say you'll have a school that says, if a girl doesn't wear stockings, she's over. Well, it depends. According to the Mishnah Berurah, she's not over. According to the Chazon Ish, it would also be. I'll tell you where for me it's particularly a problem is that we very frequently have not religious people over Friday night. We do that on a constant basis as a method of kiruv.
Right.
Particularly Friday, but often for both Shabbos meals, we'll have Friday people over. And if you're not saimach on the Aruch HaShulchan, which I do very reluctantly, so then it becomes a whole issue. At what point do you have to try to look into your siddur or turn around or try to create some other thing? And at what point do you say, look,
sorry to interrupt, but don't forget the Aruch HaShulchan only speaks about hair. He doesn't speak about other covered parts of the body.
I understand, but the Svara would arguably be, I think, would be you could technically extend that Svara.
Well,
right?
let's say to sleeveless, to a girl who's wearing a sleeveless
short sleeves or a skirt that you would say goes to the top of the knee. It's debatable, but I would take that position, and we could discuss that later. So if you don't want to, so for me it becomes a shayla. When do you look in? When don't you look in? So knowing that there's a halacha, say, look, Mechaber Adin, you're allowed to do this. Havada, our daughters, a makbid on this, etc. But it does, it is important from a halacha point of view to know what is the halacha, what is the minhag, what is the Chumrah, etc.
Right, but even if
you don't hold of the, even if you're in Bnei Brak and you don't hold of the whatchamacallit.
The Mishnah Berurah. But I think that even Talmidim of the Chazon Ish would concede that yesh al milismach, right? Yeah. Meaning if the alternative is to drive yourself crazy, to look away, to cause somebody offense, we have to understand that, Tzniyus is beautiful and important, but you shouldn't pay a price for it. Meaning if you're going to be offending people, turning people away from Yiddishkeit and doing things that are unpleasant for yourself or for others, then you can be makbid on Ikar Adin, and certainly the Mishnah Berurah and many other poskim is a sufficient yesh al milismach in this case.
So what about, Rabbi, let's say you're making Kiddush, and you have a Balas Tshuva, or not a Balas Tshuva, a Friar person who's maybe will one day be a Baal Tshuva or a Balas Tshuva, and she's wearing short sleeves. Give us some guidelines on that, or a shirt that's lower than up to the clavicle. What would you say? How would you give us some guidelines?
Well, first of all, you can close your eyes, yesh al milismach, and just have good kavanah with your eyes closed. And that's the easy way out, both in answering the question and in technically, in practical terms. But of course, beyond that, if one wants to actually know the halacha, these are tough questions. Sleeves, for example, some folks can assume that the zroya is like the sheikh. The Mishnah Berurah mentions when he speaks about honey prutas, he says something depends on minhag, he says. But when it comes to the sheikh or the zroya, then even in places where they reveal them, but the halacha doesn't change. The Mishnah Berurah says that explicitly in Ein Hey, days or something like that. But at the same time, that's not an easy position to take, because in in Even HaEzer, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch, when they speak about Das Yehudis, so they say explicitly that the Zroya is a question of Das Yehudis. And Das Yehudis generally means a custom, the custom of good Jewish girls, right? But Das Yehudis isn't the same level as the Mishabur, who says that it's something unchanging, that it can never alter and change. And of course, the Mishabur, one can understand very well where he's coming from in the kind of society that he lived in. In today's society, if you look outside the frum community, then the girls wearing the short sleeves are the most Tzniyus girls. That's how the queen would dress today, right? So obviously society has very much changed on that level. So certainly for our community, of course, we have our standards, and those standards are a binding custom on people living within the community. But somebody from outside the community, well, if she's, modestly dressed in short sleeves, then, you're not going to tell her off. And I think that would make a difference also for kiddush. But, again, these are delicate questions. And each situation has to be judged, and each garment needs to be judged on its individual merits and the contrary.
Right. Talk to us about trousers. Is it because of Tzniyus? Is it because of Silbash? Give us the various opinions.
Well, I assume you're saying trousers because I'm a Brit. Otherwise, you would say pants.
Yes, because I'm speaking to a Brit, I guess. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your understanding. So again, once upon a time, it was a very new thing for girls, for women to wear trousers, and then of course this could be a significant issue of Silbash when it was a question. This was a man's mode of dress. It was the way that men dress. This is not the way that women dress. So those first women who were brave enough to put on their trousers would be certainly bordering or certainly going into overstepping the line of Silbash. Today, that's very difficult to. I think that's a very difficult line to argue. In a day where it's absolutely the norm for women to wear trousers, to wear pants, and not only is it the norm, but it's also very distinguishable and different. Pants are made, specially made. These are women's pants. These are men's pants. Clearly distinguished and different, basically. So it's difficult, I think, to argue that there would be an issue of Silbash here. And of course, Pres can discuss it. Rabbi Reuven discusses it in his Chumrah, and others discuss it. And I'm aware that some Poskim, Rav Vosner, for example, and others mention the Silbash prohibition. But I just think that it's difficult. It's unpersuasive in today's world.
I know that there are Poskim in Bnei Brak who believe wearing a watch is Silbash also. That's the truth.
Well, at the turn of the century, at the turn of the century, it was women's garments. Hand wash, a wrist wash, what used to be a women's item of jewelry. So, but things have changed, and absolutely, and but these are delicate questions also. When does it change? I've been asked often about grooming for men. Can men groom their eyebrows? Can they shave body hair? Is this considered something which is still Silbash because it's the way of women, or does it change because today it's the way of many men to do it? And these things, one has to keep a finger on the pulse of society and understand whether this is really predominantly a female thing, or whether it's, that's passé, it's just no longer the case. And the same is true about women wearing pants, and I think today it's fairly clear that, few are the women who come to work wearing skirts today, and I think that's just the way society is. the other question, of course, is whether there's a Tzniyus issue outside of Leisobas. And I think certainly it depends on a community norm, right? In our communities, of course, it's not Tzniyus because it sticks out. It's not what people do, and there's a good reason for that also, because at the end of the day, when you start wearing pants and trousers, then there is a real issue of how tight the pants and trousers are, how much they emphasize the contours and the lines of parts of the body that we wish to keep tzanua, to keep modest. And to start getting into loose pants and tight pants and tights and so on is of course a headache that nobody wants to get into, and a slippery slope that Poskim and Halacha is of course cautious of and wishes to refrain from, and therefore there's good reason for why from society doesn't accept wearing pants for women.
Now, let me ask you a last question. We're a little running out of time, and it's fascinating to have you on. But isn't Tzniyus by men a topic that is severely, not spoken about where it should be? I mean, and I'm going to get criticized for this one, but I was in a shul a number of years ago by a minor Rebbe, and there was a big sign on the wall, and it said, Kavod, Kedushas, Mereinu, V'Rabbeinu, Adeinenu, whatever his name was, is going to be speaking to the ladies about Tzniyus. And I was thinking that the only one time it says in the whole Torah the word Tzniyus is Hatzneya Leches Em Hashem Alekecha. Now, giving yourself 15 titles doesn't, by me, fall under the rubric of Hatzneya Leches. So he's violating Tzniyus to talk to women about Tzniyus. So my question is that isn't Tzniyus like, why don't we speak to somebody who we feel is arrogant or crass or crude or makes inappropriate jokes? That is just as much a violation of Tzniyus as wearing a short skirt or wearing a short sleeves, and yet it is not really spoken about. I mean, maybe I'm overreacting. What's your feeling?
Well, you'll forgive me if I don't comment on the specific, issue of the Rebbe's notice, not going in that direction. But certainly, there is Tzniyus is neglected, without a doubt, when it comes to men. The Aruch HaShulchan, actually, I remember seeing in Siman Hey, he has a chakira about whether, just like a man shouldn't see or can't say kriyashma, he's talking about kriyashma, just like a man can't say kriyashma in front of an uncovered woman, would the same thing apply to a woman who shouldn't say or can't say kriyashma in front of an uncovered man? Interesting that he raises this, because I don't remember seeing anybody else of that stature raising the question. And he himself, if I remember correctly, says, well, I haven't seen this in any poskim, so I guess it's okay. And he makes a distinction between men and women in a certain sense of Hehorim. But yeah, of course, what you're saying is true. Being tzanua means having an inner world, having your own personal and private world, which you don't, flaunt and show off and express with arrogance at every occasion. And this goes back to where we started. The only time that men are spoken to about Tzniyus is about warning their wives how to dress, which I find, appalling. But at the same time, it has to be said that when it comes to, it's much easier for us as a frum society, for rabbis, for rebbes, for whoever it is, to speak about halacha. Halacha is guidelines. It's very, clearly defined borderlines. These centimeters, this thickness, these colors, this length, and so on and so forth. And when you make a value into a very halachic system, then of course you will emphasize and sometimes overemphasize the halachic part of the system and speak less about the values, which are by definition a little bit more vague, a little bit harder to define. As a halachic rabbi or somebody that gives halachic rulings, then you'll have less to speak about when you speak to men, because there isn't much halachic material there. It's a value, but it's much harder for us to maintain values than it is to stick to clearly demarked, demarcation lines of halacha. And this is why there is such an emphasis on the halachic aspects that are related more to women than the basic value of Tzniyus as it relates to men. Now, I would say, though, that, and this you mentioned at the beginning, there are many halachas that also relate to men concerning Tzniyus, but it's more convenient, it's easier to make our, public domain as sterile as possible, and this makes, men's life easier, as it were. I think it's very important to be mechanech both ourselves and our children to those values of tznius for men and for women alike. But it's also understandable that a halachic society will emphasize and underscore those halachic elements. So, what I'm basically saying is that yes, you're right, but it's something which we can understand where it's coming from, and it's not set to go away anytime soon.
Do you think it's fair to say that we've a little bit, as a community, maybe lost the message of tznius? In other words, a very lavish wedding, over-the-top wedding, would, to me, in my eyes, be not tzniustic, right? Somebody, just spending on money that is very fleshy and in your face is not tzniustic, and that while there is certainly an element of tznius which talks about, hirurim, etc., but certainly a big body of tznius that Chazal have spoken about is about feinkeit, edelkeit, being sensitive, modesty, royalty, elegance, in other words, a beauty of behavior, and that if we just turn it into, body parts of and clothing articles, we're missing the message of tznius. And what's more, I think we're making it joyless for girls. Whereas girls could see, I'm now a queen, it becomes like an issue of which box of no have I not checked today? Have we a little bit lost the message?
I deeply identify with what you're saying now, and I would add that it's not something which is limited to the field of tznius. I think that this applies to other fields also. Just the other day I went to Nichem Avelim, and I saw people coming in, and they came in, they sat down a minute, they said Hamakim Menachem Eschem, as if there's some halachic mitzvah that they're doing, and walking out. And I was thinking, where's the Nichem Avelim? When things become too technical, when we underlie, like you say, the centimeters and the body parts and so on, then there's a danger of missing the wood for the trees, as the expression goes. And, while, of course, the halachic parts are essential and are a deep part of what our Yiddishkeit means to us, we have to be very wary of not missing the value for the halacha. And of, I salute you in making the point, and I think it's very worthy of emphasis.
Rabbi Pfeffer, it's always an honor to have you on with us. The Dayan from Eretz Yisrael, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. All the best.
We have the honor of having with us from Hungary, the Av Bezdin of Budapest. He's also the Shliach of Chabad to Budapest, Harav Baruch Oberlander, who's written and printed on many of these topics. Welcome, Rav Oberlander.
Hello, hi.
Rabbi Oberlander, could you tell us the Shita of Chabad about Sheitlach, hair covering, etc.?
The Shita of Chabad should start with the with the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, in Erechaim, Siman Ayin Hey, Siv Daled, brings down the Ramah. The Ramah writes that Peah Nachris is allowed. You're allowed to say Shema in front of a Peah Nachris. It's not considered an Erva. And the Ramah says, I feel a darka lechasois. And even though it's usually covered, it's not a problem. It doesn't have to be covered. And the Alter Rebbe brings it down. I feel a darka lechasois, lechasoisa muter likris kenegda, v'gam muter legaloisa. It's allowed to be uncovered. It's not a problem at all. So that's where the Chabad Shita starts. The Tzemach Tzedek in the Tshuvas and also in the Chedushim on Shas has a long pilpul, is mefalpul with the Maram Alsheker that even the little hair shouldn't be uncovered, and that halachically, and that connects to the Mogan Avraham. That the Mogan Avraham writes that the Zohar was machmir ma'oid shelo yiroa shum sar meisha.
So Chabad, Rabbi Oberlander, Chabad does not hold of the Shulchan Aruch that says tefach be'isha erva.
Tefach be'isha is the gufa isha.
No, but Basar also. The tefach be'isha Ayin Hey is talking about Sar too. That any makam hamachusa except for the shaykh, the Taz says, has a din of tefach be'isha erva. Does Chabad not hold of that, etc.?
No, but
what I'm asking Rabbi Oberlander is that according to the Mechaber, it seems that up to a tefach is mutter to show of the hair, and in fact, like we said, like if you look at the pictures of the great, the great Rebbe Vadia, you could see clearly him and his wife. They held like the Mechaber Kipshutai, like the Beis Yosef, that up to tefach is not a problem. What is Chabad's sheet on that?
No, it's not accepted in Chabad that till a tefach should be allowed to be uncovered, and probably that connects to the Zohar. The Zohar says it shouldn't be uncovered at all. Not only on the street, but even at home, it shouldn't be uncovered at all. And that's
it's interesting, Rabbi Oberlander. We've had you on. This is the second time we've had you on, and you know I come from Hasidim, so you try to find makish Indian. Both times Chabad was machmer, not like the Shulchan Aruch. Sai like shaving, they didn't go to like the Beis Yosef, and Sai like by tefach bisha, they don't go like the Shulchan Aruch. They're more machmer than the Shulchan Aruch, which is interesting.
Let me repeat myself that we spoke last time that anything brought down in the Noise Kelim of the Shulchan Aruch is part of Halacha, and here we're talking about again the Mogan Avraham, which is very machmer, and that's the minhag, which is
okay. Now, what does Chabad hold about shaving the head? In other words, the word paiskim, early paiskim, I think it started with the Vadala Daratzis, which is give or take 250, 300 years ago, where they said women should shave their head, which was accepted in much of Hungary, in Oberlander, a very limited amount in Poland and in Lithuania. What was Chabad's sheet about that? Both alts, but because it is Magen Avraham, by the way, because it is Magen Avraham, they shouldn't see at all the Sar, shouldn't see the building, any place that they were makbid in that, both for Chatzitza, both for Tzzniyus, etc. What was Chabad's sheet on this?
Yes, it's brought down in the name of Vad Arba Rotzis, but it's not found in the Pinkas. The Vad Arba Rotzis is not found, but it's brought down in the name of the Vad Arba Rotzis. The Lubavitcher Rebbe held that the hair should be cut short, but not very short. Not very short because it's nivul. It's nivul, and it shouldn't be too short. Short it should be also, so it shouldn't go out. It shouldn't be uncovered, and also for tefillah and mikveh, if the hair is short, it's easier to toivel, less chashash of chatzitza, etc. But it should not be cut completely.
When you say nivul, what does that mean? Explain to the crowd who may not know.
For example, the Rebbe points to that in the Holocaust, when they wanted to embarrass the Jewish women, they shaved their heads, which for a woman is very embarrassing.
Well, I respectfully, I could go prior to that. It says by Ashes Yefas Toyer, it says V'golcha es Reisha, you shave her head, and the Ramban says because it makes her look, because it's an evil of the Isha, V'golcha es Reisha.
Yeah, it says that there are many. There are a few sources on the subject. So the Rebbe says that it should not be shaved completely.
And you were going to say you were going to continue. You said that Tzemach Tzedek, and then you were going to continue on further.
Yeah, the Tzemach Tzedek writes very strongly. He refutes the Maram Alsheker that you're allowed to have hair a little uncovered. Mibad litzamoson.
What's the Rashba?
He writes very strong. Yeah, with the Rashba, and he has the Arichas also in Chedushim on Masechtes Brachas, and also in the Tshuvas in Even Ezer. And then we get to the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
So wait, but Rabbi Oberlander, so was the Tzemach Tzedek go with the Rashba, and he held me badlet samasim as mutter or not?
No. He says it's not.
So he was machmir. He did not hold like the Rashba. He was machmir over the Rashba. Okay.
Yes. And then comes the Lubavitcher Rebbe when he not once and not twice he wrote in letters and different places that he prefers much more a sheitel over a mitpachas, over a tichel. Why? He says that by a sheitel completely covers the hair, a tichel could sometimes slip a little bit, slip a lot, and much of the hair can be uncovered. So he very, very strongly urged for a sheitel against covering it with a tichel.
And is that the only reason he brings?
Yeah, that's the reason that he brings is because the sheitel covers much more, and also that it doesn't slip. And he says that sometimes even a lady which would cover her hair correctly would meet somebody and would feel a little uncomfortable, and she just moves a little bit back the tichel, and it's already uncovered. And by sheitel, it's not practical, such a thing. This is the point that he brought up. I personally feel that there's also another point which points to a sheitel over a tichel, because a sheitel can be much more elegant than a tichel, and that's why you could much easier get people to put on to have kisui rosh, to have hair covered with a sheitel than with a tichel. For example, I know certain Sephardi women that go uncovered their hair. Why? Because the sheitel is not allowed by the Sephardim, so they prefer not to cover their hair.
Wow.
So I feel that's another reason why we should prefer a sheitel over a tichel, because a woman should feel that she could be very elegantly, nicely dressed, and she doesn't have to be, she doesn't have to know what it's called, give up on this.
Can I suggest another possibility?
Mm-hmm.
The Igros Moshe in Even Ezer Aleph Nun Tes was asked about a man who was makbid that his wife shouldn't cut her hair, and her minhag
like
was
a Rav and a Rebbetzin seems like
yeah.
Yeah.
So Moshe writes something very interesting, and Moshe writes, he says that Chayni HaMagal, the Gemara says in Tainus and Daf Chav Gimel, was makbid that his wife should dress beautifully. Why? So that he shouldn't look at other women. Kadei shelo yitin eina b'isha acheres. So Moshe writes that there's something about a husband and a wife that the husband should look at his wife and find her no beinav, right? So and bechlal, So I would suggest, and I don't know this, that is it possible that Chabad in particular, they don't live in ghettos, but a Chabad shliach is out in the world, and he's usually surrounded by Freie people for the most part, and maybe some. But their job is to be Makarev. You're not Makarev for the most part. You don't go to Borough Park to be Makarev people. You go to the Arba Kanfis Aretz. And therefore, when you're out in the world, and women today are dressed in the most, not Tzniyus, provocative way. So if his wife is going to be wearing a tichel, it creates the challenge that Chayni Amagal struggled with. Sir Moshe writes.
Makes it 100%, and not only for Arba Campus Arts, it makes sense also for Williamsburg and Borough Park also. It's that when it happens. The Gemara in Shabbos says that that's why you're allowed to go with a Peah Nochis Bechotzer on Shabbos. Kedei Lechavav Al Baila, I think that's the Lashon over there in
right.
Shabbos.
Right.
Meaning, you have to go too far. The Gemara says that, and there's no question about that.
Now, did the Chabadske Rebbe have an opinion about human hair sheitlach?
Yes, the Rebbe writes that that a woman can wear a sheitel even if the sheitel is much nicer than her own hair, like some things and I feel that he meant to say even if it's human hair. But human hair is mentioned in the Ramah. The Ramah in Darkei Moshe in Hilchos Shabbos writes and the Ramah mentions in Darkei Moshe even if it's her own hair, she could have a sheitel from that.
Yeah, and the Mishnah Berurah brings that. The Mishnah Berurah in Ayin Hay brings that opinion as well. And I don't have a Mishnah Berurah in front of me, but it's like I'm guessing Mishnah Berurah Sivkat and Daled or Hay brings brings it as well. Halacha. It brings two opinions.
It's strange that sometimes people have this. People think as if human hair is something that was invented yesterday.
Yeah.
According to when the Gemara talks about the woman putting on saris that the hair should look more. Bepashtus, it's talking about human hair.
Yeah. And again, you're pointing out that even if it's her own hair that was cut off and turned into a wig, the Ramah is not there.
Yeah, the Ramah says beferish, even if it's her own hair. Ben shel chaverta, ben shel saroi seho.
Right. And did the Rebbe of Chabad have an opinion about the Indian hair sheitlach and this whole tumult that's going on?
I don't recall that he ever said something about it.
Have the Paiskim in Chabad ever opined on it or looked into that topic?
I looked into the subject. And it seemed to me, according to witnesses, I'm talking about Goyshe witnesses that writing down their experience, that we're not talking about tikroives avodah zarah. It's like something a bittul that they do, that it's like humility, bringing them to humility, whatever. But there's no mizbeach and there's no avodah zarah in front of them while they're doing. So I don't think that we're talking about tikroives avodah zarah over here.
Now, did the Rebbe of Chabad have any opinion about long sheitlach as opposed to short sheitlach? Did he ever speak about it?
Long and short sheitlach is not. The Rebbe didn't specifically point out long and short and how long. Just generally, what the poskim say, also on sheitlach and also on dresses and also on makeup and everything that should be tzniusdik. So there always has to be a border of what you shouldn't, where you should stop.
So you're saying it's not a din in long or short; it's a din in tznius.
It's a din in tznius, and you could have the most tzniusdik dress, meaning tzniusdik in size, in length, and it could be not tzniusdik because it's provocative or whatever. It passes a certain border. So sure, the sheitel also has to be able and has to be matim to the halacha of tznius.
Rabbi Oberlander, thank you very much for telling our olam what the shita of Chabad is about, hair covering. Thank you so much for your time. It's always an honor to have Bezdin of Hungary on with us.
Thank you very much.
We have on the phone with us from Chicago the very well-known, famous blogger from Emes Famuna, Rabbi Maryles. He's a musmach of Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik. Welcome, Rabbi Maryles.
Thank you.
So, Rabbi Maryles, we're doing, one program about Sheitlach, or we're actually going to do 2 or 3 different aspects. And one of the things that many of our listeners have written us is, how come in Lithuania it was known that the vast majority of women did not cover their hair, including many famous Rosh Yeshiva's wives? I don't know, I can't give you a list, but this is what my writers write. And there must be, was everybody there doing avaryanim, or is there some type of a halachic basis for this? I understand that you've written about this, spoken about this. Could you give us a little perspective?
Okay. First, let me preface anything I want to tell you. I'm not a posek, and it's strictly my opinion based on my many, many years of study, and it's and also just general information that I've gotten anecdotally. The fact is, I believe that many people in Lithuania, people, the Haskalah movement had started to come in, and women were more out in the world. And I believe what happened is that they took on the custom of not covering their hair for those reasons. I mean, I can't really say why they did it, but I do know that it was very prevalent, as you said earlier, and it's mentioned in the Aruch HaShulchan that this was very much the case, even though it was really against halacha. But the fact that so many women did it, he believed that it allowed for people to make a bracha, even in front of a woman who didn't cover their hair. Now, there's a concept called Sera Be'isha Irva, which means that the hair of a woman is considered Irva, meaning nakedness. But I don't believe that is in the same sense that it's used in other places in the Gemara. Therefore, the Irva by a woman's hair could not possibly be naked because we're only talking about a married woman. An unmarried woman does not have to cover her hair at all. So why it applies to a married woman and not an unmarried woman, I don't know. But that's the way the halacha is, and it's derived from the Torah. It's based on the Maisa of the Sota, where the procedure is that her hair is uncovered. So Chazal learned from that a woman normally covers her hair, a married woman. So that's pretty much the history of it, to the best of my knowledge.
So, why in Lithuania were they makel against the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch Mefareshes?
There's another thing about sheitel that I should mention, also covering the hair, and there's something called Das Yehudis and Das Moshe. Das Moshe is more of the Oraisa level of Isser, and that's basically covering the majority of the hair. And Das Yehudis, the Benos Yisrael took upon themselves a little bit more of a chumrah to cover their hair completely. That's my understanding of it. Why in Lithuania, let's say not in the Hasidic Kehillos? I believe that that's probably a function of how much out in the world the two communities were. In the Hasidic world, I think the women were less likely to go out and more likely to be more dedicated to the halacha. Whereas in the Lithuanian world, where once upon a time everyone covered their hair, Jews and non-Jews alike, people became lax about it, and I think that Jewish women followed suit when they started being more involved in the outside world, going to work and going to university. I think that's what caused the problem. One thing led to another, one generation led to another. I don't know how long this particular thing, or what point in history, let me rephrase that, what point in history this happened, and obviously there was a point in time where all women did cover their hair, just like the rest of the world. But, there's an expression, crystal unfortunately, and many of the innovations that come to pass in the general world, unfortunately, many Jews take upon themselves too. Often it doesn't involve halacha. In this case, it did. And for some reason, I don't believe there were too many machas made about it. I can't explain that. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but even if there was, obviously most of the Lithuanian women didn't listen to it. And this happened in America. This was very prevalent. Most Orthodox women, until I think the mass influx of immigrants after the Holocaust, most Orthodox women did not cover their hair in America for similar reasons.
is there a halachic basis that you know of for it?
No, although I do know that a modern Orthodox thinker by the name of Kollel Broid is a professor of law at I think Emory University, had tried to not justify it, but he was melamed zchus, he said, and tried to find a basis for it, but I don't think he was ultimately successful. Many people argued with him and said it was a misunderstanding of the sources. So I don't really think there is a halachic basis that I'm aware of.
Okay. Is there any other points on this topic that you'd like to discuss or you think our audience would like to hear?
Well, the only thing that concerns me, first let me just say that I personally, it's hard to rationalize the halacha that Seir B'Isha Erva applies only to married women, not unmarried women. So I have a little bit of difficulty understanding it. Now, mind you, I'm not trying to be melamed zchus at all. I'm just telling you in terms of understanding the halacha. Also, the fact of a woman covering her hair in a society where that's not a common thing to do makes it difficult for many women, especially in the modern Orthodox world, to cover the hair properly until the advent of the modern wig, the modern sheitel. Now, they're very, very expensive, but they're made very, very well. And the fact that it's much easier for a woman to look her best by wearing a very nice sheitel makes it easier for women to cover their hair. And the recent move by some I don't know if they were Rabbanim, but some elements on the right to try and answer them, and because if they're too long or whatever the reason was, I think it pays a disservice to a situation where many women, including many in the modern Orthodox, in the centrist world, and even a lot of women on the left wing will cover their hair. Ironically, many on the left wing don't even want to rely on a sheitel, pay a nachris, which there's a machlokas in the Gemara about. They feel that it's not proper. My own Rebbe's wife did not use a sheitel. She covered her hair with a scarf. And that many modern Orthodox women on the left, you'll never see a wig on them. You'll see other kinds of head coverings. Now, many of them also don't do das Yehudis. They do das Moshe, which means they cover most of it, but not all of it. So there's many different ways to look at it. But I just want to emphasize that I'm very much in favor of women looking their best within the parameters of halacha. And if that means buying a very nice modern sheitel, I think they should go for it. And I think it does a disservice to the mitzvah of covering your hair when people try to answer various different forms of it.
Well, I saw that one place they said that if you wear a long sheitel, it's the equivalent of, again, Sarabi Sherva, because it's not Tzniyus anymore. In fact, it becomes priestistic, so it's like you're not covering your hair. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would say that it might, somebody might not think of it as modest in his community and might think of it as priestess in his community, but the strict letter of the law, if you allow pei nachos, then there's no difference between long hair and short hair. And, it isn't just hair that makes the woman. There's makeup, there's the way she dresses, there's all kinds of things that make up a woman's beauty. There's her personality, there's all kinds of things that make up a woman's beauty and attractiveness, and it isn't just the length of somebody's hair. So I would argue very strongly with that mentality, and I'm sure there are many that would disagree with me, but that's my opinion.
I'm just thinking halachically, if a woman would cover her hair with 3 hats and 3 tichloch and 2 hats, 3 scarves and 2 hats, and on top of her head, she would put a video screen attached to her tichel, and it would be playing a movie that was not Tzniyus. Would somebody say she's not covering her hair because on her head she has a movie screen that's showing not Tzniyus pictures, so it's the equivalent of not covering her hair? Anybody would laugh. They would say, of course, she's covering her hair, and she's also doing something else that's problematic. So if somebody's wearing a long sheitel, which means they're covering their hair, and their sheitel is now creating hirhurim, right, is very attractive. Somebody thinks that crosses the line. That has nothing to do with not covering your hair. It's like the equivalent. She would have a movie screen on top of her head. So to say that it's the equivalent of not covering your hair strikes me just as honestly I'm a ratzis.
Yeah, well, there is also a difference between saying Ser B'Isha Erva and Tzniyus. Tzniyus is like almost an entirely different topic. I mean, a woman can dress according to the strict letter of the law and still not be Tzniyus.
Correct. So this would be an abrogation of Tzniyus, but would have nothing to do with not covering your hair.
It might be. I would say I would just put a little asterisk on that. It might be a violation of Tzniyus in certain circles. In other circles, it would not at all be a violation of Tzniyus. It depends on what your community standards are. Now, for example, just to show another example, in Satmar, if you don't wear very, very thick stockings with a seam, you might be considered not Tzniyus. Whereas in a typical Frum community, even in the Haredi world, that would not be true. You don't have to wear seams in your stockings. It depends on the community. It depends what their standards are.
So what is called Tzniyus, in a certain extent, changes according to your community. And I think an example is the Rambam in Hilchos. I forgot which parak, maybe parak Yud. I don't have a Rambam in front of me. He says that another example of pritzas is a woman who goes out without a redid. And the Shulchan Aruch, the Torah explains what's a redid. It's the equivalent of a hijab. It's like a burqa, something that covers the entire body except for the face. The Rambam says that if an isha wears this, she's yaitze shaloi b'ksuva because she's over al das baisha. Now, clearly, I haven't recently seen a woman wearing a redid or a hijab. So clearly, tznius changes according to the customs, like the Aruch HaShulchan and Ayin Hey that you mentioned before. So yes, clearly, you're saying in certain societies a long sheitel would be considered pretistic, and in other communities would be considered the norm.
That's correct. We have to be very careful when we talk about Tzniyus versus Erva. The Isurei Erva, the parts of the body that have to be covered, according to the strict letter of the law, are very clear and unviolable. So it doesn't matter what the community standards in terms of that are. But once you get past that, how long should a dress be below the knee? Should it be down to the ankle? Should it be down to the calf? Some people say if it's too long, it's not Tzniyus. Then already you're talking about community standards. But the strict letter of Hilchos Erva are not to be violated. There's no community standards to talk of. It's just going beyond that, what's considered Tzniyus, what's not considered Tzniyus.
Well, Rabbi Maryles, thank you very much. It's been an honor having you on with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
And this is the answers to last week's Halacha Riddle. We had many, many responses, probably more than 100. And we've chosen sort of like a raffle of those who we believe got the correct responses. And the winner this week is David Brodsky from Cincinnati. I was delighted to hear that there are actually people in Cincinnati who listen, but I think he really got it right. So let's hear what Reb David has to say.
Shalom Aleichem, Reb David. This is David Brodsky from Cincinnati, Ohio. First of all, Yesher Koyach to you for all of your beautiful Avodas HaKodesh. I get so much enough from listening to the show every week. I'm calling to answer this latest show's riddles. I'd like to suggest an answer to both of the riddles. Regarding the first riddle of Lefi L'chida, a nida does not make a bracha on her counting because she might see dam, and then it will, break the counting. So she shouldn't count if there's a possibility that something will get messed up, and then it'll be a bracha levatzola. So why don't we say the same thing with Shir Sa'imer? I think you kind of alluded to it yourself, that the difference is that when it comes to nida, it's not biyada, it's not in her control. If she sees, she can't control that. So Mamela, we're not going to start her making brachas when beyond their control, it can get ruined. Mashain Kain, when it comes to Shir Sa'imer, even though yes, a person may forget, ultimately it's biyada not to forget, and therefore Chazal did not take away the opportunity to make a bracha just because a person might forget, because ultimately it's biyadai to control that. with regards to the second riddle of why does Lefi the Taz, even though I think others argue, Lefi the Taz, why is it by Shmini Atzeres that you can be Mekabel Yontif early and you could mamish eat a Suda outside of the Sukkah, Vice Ice, that it is no longer Sukkot. It must be Shmini Atzeres. So why don't we say the same thing when it comes to Shabbos and Sfiras HaOmer? Why don't we say that if you're being Mekabel Shabbos early, you can count the Omer? I would like to suggest that the way it works when you're Mekabel Shabbos or Yontif early, it doesn't mean that you literally change the day to the next day, but rather you extend the Kedusha of the Yontif or Shabbos into the previous day. So if let's say it's Erev Shabbos, it's Friday, so now Friday has the Kedusha Shabbos, but it's not mamish the next day. So the same thing by Shmini Atzeres. If it's still Sukkot, but you extended Shmini Atzeres into Sukkot. But Lamaisa, being that you're eating a Suda that's Shayach to Shmini Atzeres, the Shmini Atzeres is Suda, so you're able to eat it outside of the Sukkah. Masha'in Kain, when it comes to counting the Omer on Erev Shabbos, once you've been Mekabel Shabbos early, being that it's still Friday and it's not the next day, you just extended the Kedusha Shabbos into Friday, so you might be able to make Kiddush, because that's Shayach to Shabbos. But a Zaitige mitzvah, we don't say that it's the next day. It's still Friday regarding other mitzvahs. It's just Lagabe Shabbos, you've extended Shabbos into Friday, so anything that's Shayach to Shabbos would be different. I also wanted to just say a few other comments on previous shows that I've been meaning to call. I just haven't had a chance. First of all, maybe over a month ago, when you spoke about feminism, you brought up the famous ha'ara that many people ask, and that is what's pshat that we say, Shaloi asani goy, Shaloi asani oved, Shaloi asani isha. Why do we say it in the negative? Why not say it in the positive? Sha'asani Yisrael. I don't have the Sefer on me, but I once had a Sefer that I read called Jewish Prayer by a Rabbi Wolgemuth of Boston. He was close with Yosef Soloveitchik of YU, and he addressed this ha'ara. He addressed this question, and he said that there were some that did. I think the Yerushalayim says that, but the reason why we don't is because it imposes upon us a great responsibility. When you say Shasani Yisrael, then you have to live up to it, and it's a kitrug if you don't. So therefore, in order to not be mekatrig on ourselves, we say that Baruch Hashem, you didn't make me a goy. Obviously, the implication is you made me a yid, but we don't like to say it straight out because then, chas v'shalom, if we don't live up to that, there'll be a kitrug on us. One last point I'd like to mention is in one of your other Haligo shows. You mentioned ha'ara. You spoke about the sheet of Chaim Soloveitchik that once you complete a mitzvah, even if it's in somewhat of a b'diavad fashion, that's it. The mitzvah is over. So you asked the ha'ara that how is it that when it comes to Mikra Megillah, the minhag Klal Yisrael is at the very end of the Megillah, the whole Tehillah reads the last pasuk out loud. Based on once they do that, l'chayra they should have finished the mitzvah, and now for the Balturei to go back and read it from a klaf, seemingly they lost that maila of reading from a klaf because the mitzvah was just completed. I would like to suggest an answer, and that is as follows. There's a machlokas, the Rambam, and I think the Ravid, or the Rosh, I believe, when it comes to Miris Mila, when it comes to Tzitzin, Shein, and Ma'aktin. So once the Mila is completely over and there's Tzitzin, Shein, and Ma'aktin that are left, the Rosh says you should still go back because there's still shaykhis of Hider mitzvah even after the mitzvah is complete. The Rambam says no, don't go back. It's done. It's finished. We can't do anything anymore. That whole machlokes is only when the mitzvah has been completed. But they all agree that when you're still being oisik in the milah itself, then of course, even the Rambam will tell you if the mitzvah is still going on, then avada, you can go back and be mahadeh the mitzvah. So I'd like to suggest that here too, when it comes to Mikra Megillah, the mitzvah is still going on. There was no das by anyone that the mitzvah is finished. The Balkari is still reading. He has a brief pause where everybody in the Kehillah reads it, but everyone still has das that we're not done. We're reading this for Persumei Nisa. And then, right after, literally, Tush Kadei Dibur, right after the Kehillah finishes, the Balkari then completes the Megillah. So being that you're still being oisik in a mitzvah, then everyone agrees, the Rambam, the Rosh, Chuli Alma Moidu, that Avada, you can still be mahadeh the mitzvah by reading out of a klaf, and it's not over, and even Rav Chaim Brisker would hold that the mitzvah is not over, and of course you can still add Hider to the mitzvah called man, it's going on. Shkoyach, again, for all of your amazing work. I look forward every week to hearing the show. I discuss it with my chaverim, and thank you so much. Kol tov.